When a god from beyond the stars crashes into the desert sands of Tatooine, the Force itself trembles in recognition. Imperial sensors detect power unlike any the galaxy has known, raw cosmic energy that makes even Vader pause in his relentless march. The Emperor's eyes turn skyward as thunder rolls across cloudless skies, his hunger for dominion stretching beyond the boundaries of his own universe. What happens when divine lightning meets the power of the dark side, and whose will shall prove stronger in this clash of cosmic forces? The twin suns of Tatooine cast long shadows across the ancient Jundland wastes as a disturbance rippled through the fabric of reality. What began as a shimmering distortion in the cloudless sky erupted into a blinding column of rainbow light that pierced the atmosphere with cosmic fury. Local moisture farmers would later speak of thunder without clouds and lightning without storms. The desert floor cratered beneath the impact as the brilliant beam receded skyward, leaving behind a lone figure sprawled amid smoldering sand turned to glass. Thor Odinson, Prince of Asgard, God of Thunder, awakened to a world not his own. The familiar weight of Mjolnir still clutched in his hand offered the only comfort in this alien landscape. Rising to his feet, his crimson cape billowing in the hot desert wind, Thor surveyed the barren expanse stretching to every horizon. This was not Midgard, nor any of the 9 realms he had known. The very air tasted different, charged with energies both familiar and foreign. Something here resonated with his godly essence yet remained fundamentally unlike the cosmic forces of Asgard. Across the galaxy, in the sterile meditation chamber aboard the Imperial Star Destroyer Executor, Darth Vader opened his eyes. Through the swirling currents of the dark side, he had sensed a tremor unlike any disturbance he had felt before. Not since the Clone Wars had the Force responded with such violent recognition of an rival. This was power, ancient and potent, crashing into their reality like a stone upon still water. The Dark Lord rose, his mechanical breathing keeping perfect rhythm despite the unsettling vision. Whatever had entered their galaxy was neither Jedi nor Sith, yet it blazed in the Force like a newborn star. Such power could not be allowed to exist beyond the Emperor's control. With purposeful strides, Vader left his chamber to inform his master of the disturbance. Thor began walking toward a cluster of domed structures in the distance, the strange binary sunset casting his shadow long across the sand. The journey gave him time to recall the conflict that had brought him to this place. Loki, his schemes, the Bifrost spinning out of control during their battle. His brother had always been clever, but this time his mischief had cast Thor beyond the known universe itself. As night fell over the desert, bringing with it a spectacular canopy of unfamiliar stars and distant worlds, Thor realized the magnitude of his displacement. The constellations above bore no resemblance to any sky he had gazed upon in his thousands of years of existence. The settlement Thor approached was unlike any village he had encountered across the realms. Creatures of bizarre form and function moved through curved streets beneath structures built from materials foreign to Asgardian architecture. Some resembled beasts, others machines, yet all moved with unmistakable intelligence. Among them walked beings similar enough to Asgardians that Thor felt a measure of relief. Perhaps communication would not be impossible after all. As he entered the outskirts of Mos Eisley spaceport, heads turned and conversations halted. His armor, his cape, his very presence marked him as something other than the usual travelers and scoundrels who frequented this wretched hive. A hooded figure observed Thor from the shadows of a cantina entrance, noting the strange hammer and the way the newcomer carried himself, like royalty. Beneath the hood, keen eyes narrowed with interest. The observer was no ordinary desert dweller but a survivor of a nearly extinct order. Luke Skywalker, last of the Jedi, had returned briefly to his homeworld following a vision in the Force. Now he understood why he had been drawn back to this place he had once been so desperate to leave. The Force swirled around the armored stranger like nothing Luke had ever witnessed, neither light nor dark, but something altogether different. Thor found himself confronted by a squad of white-armored soldiers whose blocky helmets concealed their faces. Their weapons were pointed at his chest, and their posture suggested they were accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Identify yourself," demanded their leader, the voice made mechanical by the helmet. "This sector is under Imperial control. All off-worlders must present identification and state their business." Thor regarded them with the bemused patience of one who had dealt with petty authorities across 1,000 worlds. "I am Thor Odinson, Prince of Asgard, God of Thunder. I seek only information and perhaps transport from this realm." The lead trooper stepped forward. "Unauthorized weapons are forbidden. Surrender the hammer and come with us for processing." What happened next would become legend in Mos Eisley for generations. As the trooper reached for Mjolnir, Thor smiled. When the soldier attempted to lift the weapon, he found it immovable as a mountain. In frustration, the trooper signaled to his squad, who opened fire with their blasters. Energy bolts struck Thor's armor and flesh, causing him to stagger but not fall. His expression shifted from amusement to determination as lightning began crackling around his form without summons. "I intended no quarrel with your realm," Thor announced as the electricity intensified, "but neither do I submit to those who greet strangers with violence." With a sweeping motion, Thor raised Mjolnir skyward. The cloudless night above Mos Eisley suddenly darkened as storm clouds formed from nothing, swirling in response to his will. Lightning struck downward, not to kill but to scatter the Imperial troops. Thunder cracked so loudly it shattered windows throughout the spaceport. The troopers, trained to fight rebels and smugglers but never a being who commanded the sky itself, broke formation and retreated in disarray. Luke Skywalker watched in astonishment as the stranger controlled the elements themselves. This was no application of the Force as he understood it. This was something else entirely, something that nonetheless resonated with the cosmic energy that bound all things. He made a decision then, stepping from the shadows and approaching Thor as the last of the stormtroopers disappeared into the twisting streets. "That was impressive," Luke said, lowering his hood. "But you've just alerted every Imperial within 50 parsecs to your presence. And trust me, they'll send more than a routine patrol next time." Thor turned to face this new arrival, sensing something different about the young man. There was power here too, though it manifested differently than his own. "I have visited many realms, but this place is unfamiliar to me. What world is this, and what empire speaks with such entitlement?" "You really aren't from around here," Luke replied with a hint of a smile. "This is Tatooine, though it's hardly representative of the galaxy. As for the Empire, they've ruled most of the known systems for over 2 decades. Some of us have been fighting to restore freedom and the Republic they destroyed." Thor nodded gravely. Tyrannical empires were nothing new across the cosmos. "I am Thor of Asgard, though I suspect that name holds no meaning here." "Luke Skywalker," the young Jedi replied, extending his hand in greeting. "And you're right, I've never heard of Asgard. Is it in the Outer Rim?" Their conversation was interrupted by the wail of approaching sirens. Luke tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward the lightsaber concealed beneath his robes. "We should continue this elsewhere. I have a ship docked in Bay 94. I think my friends in the Alliance would be very interested to meet you." Thor considered the offer momentarily. He had no knowledge of this world's politics or conflicts, but the white-armored soldiers had fired upon him without provocation. Moreover, this Luke Skywalker carried himself with honor, and Thor had always been a fair judge of character. "Lead on, Luke Skywalker. It seems the Norns have guided my path to your rebellion." As they moved through the back alleys of Mos Eisley, Luke explained the basics of the galactic situation. The Empire, the Rebellion, the Force. Thor listened attentively, drawing parallels to conflicts he had witnessed across the 9 realms. By the time they reached the docking bay where the Millennium Falcon waited, Thor had gained a rudimentary understanding of the struggle in which he had, unwittingly, become involved. What neither realized was that their meeting had sent ripples through the Force that reached the highest echelons of Imperial power. On Coruscant, Emperor Palpatine sat motionless upon his throne, eyes closed in deep meditation. The dark side showed him fragments of what had transpired on Tatooine, a being wielding power outside the Force, a hammer that channeled energies similar to Sith lightning yet fundamentally different. And most troubling, this newcomer now in conversation with the last Jedi, the son of Skywalker. Fascinating, Palpatine murmured as he opened his eyes. Lord Vader was correct. A new player has entered our game. His thin lips curled into a smile that held no warmth. Dispatch the Inquisitors. I want this Thunder God brought before me. If he cannot be turned, his power must be studied before it is extinguished. The Millennium Falcon broke atmosphere with Imperial TIE fighters in close pursuit. In the cockpit, Han Solo maneuvered the freighter with the skill born of countless escapes, while Chewbacca roared in frustration at the persistent Imperial pilots. I leave you alone for one supply run, Han shouted over his shoulder to Luke, and you bring back a guy who claims to be a god and has the entire Imperial garrison on our tail. Thor stood behind them, watching the starfield with unconcealed wonder as the ship accelerated away from the desert planet. Never in all his journeys had he witnessed travel like this. Even the Bifrost, for all its majesty, did not compare to the sensation of a starship entering hyperspace. When the stars stretched into streaking lines before dissolving into the swirling blue tunnel of hyperspace, Thor could not suppress a laugh of pure amazement. The cosmos unfolds differently here, he remarked to no one in particular. Heimdall himself would struggle to comprehend such vastness. Luke led Thor to the ship's common area, where they could speak more freely. You mentioned Asgard, the Jedi began. I've studied star charts from across the galaxy and never encountered that system. Thor settled his considerable frame onto a bench, placing Mjolnir beside him. Asgard is not merely a world, but a realm, one of the 9 connected by Yggdrasil, the World Tree. I fear I have fallen beyond even its furthest branches into a cosmos unknown to my people. The explanation meant little to Luke, but the sincerity behind the words was unmistakable. He reached out with his Force senses, trying to understand the nature of this being. What he perceived was unlike anything he had encountered. Thor's presence in the Force was massive, ancient, and complex. Neither light nor dark, but something primal that predated such distinctions. This power you speak of, the Force, Thor continued, it resembles in some ways the cosmic energies that flow through Yggdrasil, though its manifestations seem more subtle. On Asgard, we recognized magic as simply science beyond Midgardian understanding. Perhaps your Force and my godhood are not so dissimilar at their core. Luke considered this. The Force is described as an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us, penetrates us, binds the galaxy together. Those sensitive to it can perceive and manipulate it, though such abilities were largely destroyed when the Emperor and my father hunted down the Jedi Order. Thor's eyes narrowed at the mention of genocide. This Emperor of yours sounds not unlike my own father in his darker moments, though Odin ultimately chose wisdom over continued conquest. Tell me, Luke Skywalker, does your rebellion stand a chance against such tyranny? Before Luke could answer, the ship shuddered violently. Han's voice came over the intercom, tense with controlled panic. We've got a problem. The Empire must have predicted our jump coordinates. There's an Imperial Star Destroyer waiting for us, and they've locked on with a tractor beam. Thor rose to his feet, gripping Mjolnir. Then, we shall give them a battle worthy of song. Luke shook his head. It's not that simple. A Star Destroyer carries thousands of troops and enough firepower to reduce planets to ash. We need a plan. The Millennium Falcon shuddered again as it was inexorably drawn into the massive hangar bay of the Imperial vessel. Thor could see the enormous wedge-shaped warship through the viewport, dwarfing the Falcon like a whale might dwarf a minnow. Its scale was impressive even by Asgardian standards. If direct confrontation is unwise, Thor said thoughtfully, perhaps deception is called for. I have learned some subtlety from my brother's schemes, though I prefer the forthright approach. Han and Chewbacca joined them, the smuggler's expression grim. They'll board us the moment we're secure in their hangar. Standard procedure is to send in troopers first, then officers to verify identification. Thor smiled, a plan forming. Then let us give these Imperials something unexpected. When the Revide stormtroopers boarded the Millennium Falcon, they found no resistance. The ship appeared empty, abandoned by its crew. They moved methodically through the corridors, checking compartments and cargo holds, unaware that their quarry lay in wait. The loading ramp remained open, a silent invitation for more troops to enter the trap. From his hidden vantage point, Thor observed the white-armored soldiers. They moved with disciplined precision, but lacked the warrior instinct that might have warned them of the ambush. When a sufficient number had entered the ship, he gave the signal. Han triggered a concealed mechanism that sealed the boarding ramp, trapping the stormtroopers inside. Simultaneously, Luke activated the ship's ventilation system, which Chewbacca had modified to flood the interior with stun gas. As the troopers collapsed unconscious, Thor emerged from hiding, immune to the gas thanks to his Asgardian physiology. He gathered their weapons while Han and Luke donned the armor of two fallen soldiers. Chewbacca, too distinctive to disguise, would remain with the ship, prepared for a quick escape. This plan has a distinct flavor of Loki's tactics, Thor remarked as they prepared to venture into the Star Destroyer. Though I admit there is wisdom in it. Disguised in stormtrooper armor, Luke and Han led a seemingly captured Thor through the cavernous hangar bay of the Star Destroyer. Imperial officers and crew glanced curiously at the golden-haired prisoner and his strange weapon, which Luke carried with exaggerated effort despite its true immovability to any but Thor. The hammer was a problem they had not fully resolved, as no ordinary prisoner would be allowed to keep such an obvious weapon. But Thor had insisted that Mjolnir could not be left behind, and none but he could wield it for long. Their progress through the ship was tense but unchallenged until they reached a security checkpoint where a senior officer barred their path. The officer, a lieutenant, with the pinched expression of someone devoted to protocol, regarded Thor with obvious suspicion. "This prisoner is not logged in any transport manifest," he stated coldly. "And what is that unusual weapon? All confiscated items must be properly documented and stored." Han, disguising his voice through the stormtrooper helmet, responded with practiced authority. "Special prisoner for Lord Vader's personal interrogation. The weapon is evidence, sir. We have orders to bring both directly to him." The lieutenant was not satisfied. "I will need to verify these orders. Remain here while I contact Lord Vader's command staff." He turned toward a communications terminal. Thor exchanged a glance with Luke. Their deception was moments from unraveling. With subtle movements, he began summoning his power, electricity crackling faintly around his restraints. Before the lieutenant could reach the terminal, the ship's alarm systems activated, wailing throughout the vessel. A voice blared over the rapport. "Intercom. Security alert in Hangar Bay 12. Possible rebel infiltration. All personnel initiate containment protocols." Chewbacca had created the diversion they needed, but it also meant their window for escape was closing rapidly. The lieutenant turned back, suddenly more concerned with the alarm than the irregular prisoners. That moment of distraction was all Thor needed. With a surge of strength, he snapped the false restraints and summoned Mjolnir from Luke's grasp. "I believe," Thor announced as his hammer flew to his hand, "that the time for subterfuge has passed." Chaos erupted in the corridor. Han and Luke discarded their helmets and opened fire with blasters, while Thor swept Mjolnir in an arc that sent stormtroopers flying against bulkheads. Together, they fought their way toward what ship schematics had indicated would be an auxiliary control room, where they hoped to disable the tractor beam holding the Millennium Falcon. But the Star Destroyer was a labyrinth of identical corridors, and soon they found themselves not in a control room, but on an observation deck overlooking the main hangar. Below them, a contingent of stormtroopers had surrounded the Millennium Falcon, while others methodically searched the nearby areas. Of Chewbacca there was no sign, but smoke rising from a distant section of the hangar suggested he had not been idle. "We need to reach the tractor beam controls," Luke said urgently. "Without that, even if we get back to the ship, we can't escape." Thor studied the vast space below, noting the patterns of troop movements and the structure of the hangar itself. "There may be another way." He pointed to a series of massive power conduits running along the ceiling of the hangar. "Those carry energy throughout the vessel, do they not? If they were to be damaged in a specific manner." Han caught on immediately. A power surge could overload the tractor beam projectors. "It's risky, but it might work." "Stand back," Thor advised, raising Mjolnir. The hammer began to spin in his grasp, gathering energy until lightning crackled around it in a brilliant corona. Below, stormtroopers noticed the gathering storm and pointed upward in alarm. Orders were shouted, troops redeployed, but it was too late. With a thunderous cry, Thor unleashed his power. Lightning erupted from Mjolnir, striking the power conduits with devastating precision. Electricity arced wildly throughout the hangar, jumping from conduit to conduit in a chain reaction of overloading systems. Stormtroopers scattered as control panels exploded and lighting fixtures shattered. The very deck beneath their feet trembled with the backlash of energy. In the command bridge, officers reported multiple system failures cascading throughout the ship. Tractor beam controls went offline, followed by hangar security systems and internal sensors. The Star Destroyer, one of the mightiest vessels in the Imperial fleet, had been partially crippled by a single strike. Thor lowered Mjolnir, momentarily drained by the effort of focusing his power with such precision in an unfamiliar environment. The lightning had taken more of his strength than usual, suggesting that the cosmic energies of this galaxy interacted differently with his Asgardian abilities. "We must move quickly," he said, his voice betraying a hint of fatigue. "Such an attack will not go unanswered." As if summoned by his words, a new presence entered the hangar below. The stormtroopers, still disorganized from the lightning strike, parted to form a path for a tall figure clad entirely in black. Even from their elevated position, the mechanical breathing was audible, steady, and ominous. Luke tensed visibly. "Vader," he whispered, and there was complex emotion in that single word. "We need to go now." Thor studied the dark figure with interest. Even without understanding the Force as Luke did, he could sense the power emanating from this Vader. Here was no ordinary commander but a Sinstan's Rend ensigned, warrior of considerable ability. Their eyes met across the distance, blue against the expressionless black mask, and Thor felt the unmistakable probe of another mind attempting to touch his own. "Your father, you said?" Thor asked quietly. Luke nodded grimly. "What remains of him?" Thor had known complex fathers, had felt the weight of Odin's expectations and disappointments. Something in Luke's tone resonated with his own experiences. Family bonds are rarely simple, especially for those of us who walk with power. Han interrupted urgently. "Fascinating family therapy session, but if we don't get moving, we'll all be having a permanent reunion in whatever afterlife you folks believe in." They retreated from the observation deck just as blast doors began sealing throughout the ship in response to the emergency. Their path back to the hangar was now cut off, forcing them to find an alternative route. As they navigated the labyrinthine corridors, alarms continued to wail, and they encountered increasingly organized resistance. In the command center of the Star Destroyer, Darth Vader stood with hands clasped behind his back, reviewing the security footage of Thor's lightning attack. The raw power displayed was impressive, even to one as steeped in the dark side as he was, yet it was not the Force, not precisely. It was something adjacent to it, a different manifestation of cosmic energy channeled through the strange hammer. "Most interesting," Vader said to the nervous admiral at his side. "This being uses lightning not as I do, through hatred and will, but as naturally as breathing. And the hammer serves as both focus and amplifier." "Lord Vader," the admiral ventured, "should we not deploy all available troops to capture them?" Vader turned his masked visage toward the officer. "No. Clear all personnel from Section 523. I will confront this thunder god myself. Alert the Emperor that we have a unique opportunity to study power outside the Force. Elsewhere on the ship, Thor, Luke, and Han found themselves in increasingly desperate circumstances. Every intersection brought new squadrons of stormtroopers. Every alternate route ended in sealed blast doors. They fought their way through where necessary, but Thor was conserving his strength, aware that a greater confrontation loomed. There, Han pointed to a maintenance shaft barely visible behind a jutting bulkhead. That should lead down to the secondary hangar level. We can circle back to the Falcon from there. The shaft was cramped, designed for droids rather than humanoids, but it offered their only path forward. Thor, the largest of the three, struggled to fit his armored frame into the confined space. They descended in tense silence, emerging finally in a dimly lit service corridor far from the main thoroughfares of the vessel. "We are being herded," Thor observed as they encountered suspiciously empty passages. "Your Dark Lord arranges the board to his liking." Luke nodded grimly. "Vader is many things, but never underestimate his tactical mind. He's clearing a space for confrontation." "Then let us not disappoint him," Thor replied, gripping Mjolnir more tightly. "I have faced dark gods and demon lords across multiple realms. If battle is inevitable, better to meet it on our terms than his." They followed the empty corridors, alert for traps but finding none. The absence of resistance was more unnerving than combat would have been. Finally, they entered a vast chamber that appeared to be a training area, with high ceilings and an open floor space free of obstructions. The lighting was subdued, casting long shadows across the polished deck. At the far end of the chamber stood Darth Vader, alone and waiting. His lightsaber remained unlit at his belt, his posture relaxed yet vigilant. The rhythmic sound of his breathing echoed in the cavernous space. "The son of Skywalker." Vader's amplified voice carried easily across the chamber. "And a being who calls himself a god. The Force works in mysterious ways to bring such a meeting about." Luke stepped forward, his own lightsaber now in hand but not yet activated. "We're leaving with our ship, Vader. Stand aside." "Your ship is no longer relevant," Vader replied. "The Emperor has taken a personal interest in your new ally. His power, while not of the Force, could be of great value to the Empire." Thor moved to stand beside Luke, studying the Dark Lord with undisguised curiosity. "I have stood before emperors and kings across many realms, Dark Warrior. Few have impressed me with their claims of dominion. Why should yours be different?" Vader's mask tilted slightly, considering Thor. "Because, Asgardian, my master offers not merely conquest, but understanding. The nature of your power, the means to return to your realm, knowledge beyond what even your Odin All-Father possessed." Thor's expression hardened at the mention of his father. "You gleaned that name from my thoughts during our brief connection. Impressive, but it changes nothing. I stand with those who fight for freedom against tyranny, as I have always done." "A pity," Vader said, and there seemed genuine regret in his mechanical tone. "Then you will experience the full power of the dark side." With that, Vader ignited his crimson lightsaber, the humming blade casting an ominous red glow across his black armor. Thor raised Mjolnir in response, while Luke activated his own green blade. Han, recognizing that this confrontation had moved beyond conventional weapons, backed toward a side passage to find another route to the ship. "I'll try to reach Chewie and get the Falcon ready," he called over his shoulder. "Try not to die in the meantime." The clash, when it came, was spectacular. Vader moved with astonishing speed for one so encased in armor, his lightsaber a blur of crimson energy as he engaged both opponents simultaneously. Luke met the Dark Lord's strikes with his own blade, green and red energy, crackling where they connected. Thor found his hammer blocked by the lightsaber, the energy blade somehow resisting even Uru metal. "Fascinating," Thor remarked as he traded blows with Vader. "Few weapons can withstand Mjolnir." "The Force flows through all things," Vader replied, deflecting another strike. even the metals of other universes. Their battle ranged across the training chamber, a deadly dance of three vastly different combat styles. Luke fought with the disciplined technique of his Jedi training, economical and precise. Vader's style was overwhelming power tempered by mechanical precision. And Thor brought the battlefield experience of 1,000 years, combining Asgardian warrior training with the raw might of his godhood. Yet for all his power, Thor found himself struggling against Vader's mastery of the Force. When he attempted to summon lightning, Vader caught the energy on his lightsaber, channeling it away. When he threw Mjolnir, Vader sidestepped with preternatural awareness. It was like fighting Loki and Heimdall simultaneously, facing an opponent who combined cunning with cosmic perception. Luke, meanwhile, was gradually being driven back by his father's relentless assault. For every opening he created, Vader had a counter. The Dark Lord seemed to anticipate his every move, using the Force to stay one step ahead of both opponents. "You've grown stronger, my son," Vader acknowledged as their blades locked, "but you are still not a Jedi." "And you are still a slave to the Emperor," Luke countered, breaking the saber lock with a force push that sent Vader sliding backward several meters. Thor seized the opening, launching himself at Vader with Mjolnir raised high. The Dark Lord raised his hand, and Thor felt himself seized by invisible force, his momentum arrested in mid-air. It was not unlike the feeling of Odin's magic, a cosmic will imposing itself upon reality. For a moment he hung suspended, straining against the Force grip that held him. Impressive, Thor managed through gritted teeth. But the power of Asgard does not yield so easily to sorcery. With a surge of effort born from centuries of godly might, Thor broke free of Vader's Force grip. Lightning erupted from his body in all directions, not a controlled strike but a release of raw power. The chamber's lighting systems overloaded and shattered, plunging them into darkness relieved only by the glow of the lightsabers and the crackling energy surrounding Thor. In that strange half-light, the battle took on a more primal quality. Vader's mechanical breathing provided a steady counterpoint to the hum of lightsabers and the crash of Mjolnir. They fought with renewed intensity, each sensing that the confrontation was reaching its climax. Luke, drawing deeply on his connection to the Force, leapt impossibly high and came down behind Vader, nearly landing a decisive blow. The Dark Lord parried at the last instant, but the effort cost him his position against Thor. The Thunder God's hammer struck Vader's shoulder with enough force to dent the armor and send him staggering. For the first time, Vader seemed vulnerable. His breathing pattern altered briefly, suggesting pain or damage to his life support systems. But rather than weakening him, the injury seemed to focus the Dark Lord's power. The temperature in the chamber plummeted suddenly as Vader drew deeply on the dark side. "Enough," he growled, and the word carried tangible force. With a sweeping gesture, Vader unleashed a force repulse of staggering power. The invisible wave struck both Thor and Luke, sending them hurtling in opposite directions. Luke crashed into a wall hard enough to momentarily stun him, his lightsaber rolling from his grasp. Thor was driven to one knee, Mjolnir still clutched in his fist, but the breath knocked from his lungs. Vader advanced on Luke first, perhaps seeing him as the more vulnerable target. "Now, my son, you will understand the full power of the dark side." Thor saw the danger to his new ally and acted without hesitation. Though still recovering from Vader's attack, he raised Mjolnir and summoned the deepest wellspring of his power. The hammer began to glow with inner light, no longer merely channeling lightning but becoming a focal point for the fundamental power of Asgard itself. "Dark warrior," Thor called, his voice carrying the authority of millennia. "Face me." Vader turned, sensing the gathering power. Even through the expressionless mask, his surprise was evident in his stance. The energy Thor was channeling registered in the Force like nothing the Sith Lord had ever encountered, a storm front of pure cosmic potential. Thor brought Mjolnir down against the deck with all his godly strength. The impact point erupted in a wave of concussive force and blinding light. The very structure of the Star Destroyer groaned as energy propagated through its bones. Vader raised his hands to shield himself with the Force, but the fear wave struck him like a physical blow, lifting his armored form and hurling him across the chamber. The aftermath left a momentary silence. Thor rose slowly to his feet, the effort having taken more of his strength than he had anticipated. In this realm, distant from the world tree that connected the 9 realms, his powers were not diminished but somehow less anchored, requiring greater focus and exacting a higher toll. Across the chamber, Vader too was rising, his armor scorched and damaged but his will unbroken. The Dark Lord's lightsaber had been extinguished, but he made no move to reignite it. Instead, he regarded Thor with what seemed like newfound respect. Fascinating. Vader's damaged vocoder rendered his voice even more mechanical than before. You channel energy much as the ancient Sith did, drawing from cosmic wellsprings rather than personal emotion. The Emperor will be most interested in studying your abilities. Thor hefted Mjolnir, which felt unusually heavy in his grasp. I am not some curiosity to be studied, Dark Lord. I am Thor Odinson, and I have faced far more terrifying adversaries than you or your master. Have you? Vader asked, and there was something in his tone that gave Thor pause. You are powerful, Asgardian, but you are alone in a galaxy that operates by rules you do not fully comprehend. The Force permeates all things here, and my master is its greatest student. Before Thor could respond, the chamber shook violently, not from their battle this time, but from external impacts. The sound of distant explosions reached them, followed by the wail of new alarms. Luke, who had recovered his lightsaber and moved to Thor's side, smiled grimly. Sounds like the Alliance found us. They must have tracked the Falcon's emergency beacon. Vader's mask tilted upward briefly as he received information through his comm systems. It appears our conversation must be continued another time, he said, but make no mistake, Asgardian, we will meet again. With surprising speed for one so injured, Vader retreated through a side passage as the chamber shook again from another impact. Thor moved to pursue, but Luke caught his arm. We need to get to the Falcon, the Jedi urged. The Alliance won't hold off the entire Imperial fleet for long. Thor hesitated, torn between the desire to conclude his battle with Vader and the wisdom of tactical retreat. It was a choice he had faced many times over his long life, and experience had taught him when to press an advantage and when to withdraw. Very well, he conceded, but your Dark Warrior speaks truth. Our confrontation is merely postponed, not concluded. They made their way through the increasingly chaotic Star Destroyer, as crew members rushed to battle stations and damage control teams hurried to address the rebel attack. The confusion worked to their advantage, allowing them to move with less opposition than before. They eventually reached a service corridor that led back to the main hangar, where the Millennium Falcon waited. The hangar itself was in disarray. Several sections had been damaged by Thor's earlier lightning attack on the power conduits, and the rebel bombardment had caused further structural problems. Through it all, the Falcon sat relatively undamaged, its boarding ramp extended in invitation. Han and Chewbacca could be seen at the top of the ramp, providing covering fire against the few stormtroopers still attempting to guard the ship. There's our chariot, Thor remarked with satisfaction. Let us not keep our friends waiting. They sprinted across the open hangar deck, drawing fire from Imperial positions. Thor deflected blaster bolts with Mjolnir, while Luke used his lightsaber to similar effect. They reached the Falcon's ramp under the protective covering fire from Han and Chewbacca, ascending quickly into the relative safety of the freighter. Cutting it a bit close, aren't you? Han called as he sealed the boarding ramp. Chewie's already got the engines hot. We're leaving as soon as that tractor beam goes offline. As if on cue, the ship's systems indicated that the tractor beam had indeed been deactivated, either as a result of Thor's earlier damage to the power systems or the continuing rebel attack. Either way, their path to freedom had opened. The Falcon lifted off from the hangar deck, maneuvering through debris and structural damage toward the magnetic containment field that separated the hangar from the vacuum of space. TIE fighters scrambled to intercept them, but the rebel attackers provided unwitting cover, engaging the Imperial defenders and creating a corridor of relative safety. As they burst from the Star Destroyer's hangar into open space, Thor witnessed a spectacle unlike anything in his thousands of years of existence. The blackness of space was illuminated by the energy weapons of warships, streaking fighters, and blooming explosions. It was warfare on a scale that dwarfed even the greatest conflicts of the 9 realms, battle writ across the canvas of stars themselves. "Behold," he murmured, "Ragnarok among the stars." The Millennium Falcon accelerated away from the battle, taking evasive action against pursuing TIE fighters. In the cockpit, Han and Chewbacca worked in perfect coordination, the ship responding to their commands like an extension of their will. Luke joined them, manning one of the gun turrets to ward off the Imperial pursuit. Thor stood at the viewport, watching as the battlefield receded and the stars elongated into streaks of light as they entered hyperspace. The transition still amazed him, this method of travel so different from the Rainbow Bridge of the Bifrost yet serving a similar purpose. Once they were safely away, Luke returned to find Thor deep in contemplation. "Credit for your thoughts?" Thor turned from the viewport with a thoughtful expression. "I was considering the nature of this conflict. In my realm, I have witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the struggles between order and chaos, freedom and tyranny. The players change, but the fundamental battle remains constant across all worlds, it seems." Luke nodded in understanding. "The Force binds all living things, creating a balance that has been disrupted by the Emperor and the dark side. Our fight is to restore that balance." "Balance," Thor repeated. "My father spoke often of this concept, the equilibrium between realms that maintained cosmic stability. Perhaps there is more similarity between our universes than I first thought." Their conversation was interrupted by Han's arrival. The smuggler looked exhausted but satisfied with their narrow escape. "Well, that's twice now I've had to run from that oversized triangle," he remarked. "The Alliance fleet is regrouping at the rendezvous point. We'll meet them there and figure out what to do with our new friend." Thor extended his hand in the warrior's greeting he had learned was common across many realms. "You have my gratitude, Han Solo. Your ship and your bravery would be renowned even in Asgard's great halls." Han seemed momentarily taken aback by the formal thanks but recovered quickly, accepting the handshake with a crooked smile. "Yeah, well, the Falcons pulled us out of worse situations. Though I have to admit, fighting alongside someone who can call down lightning is a new experience, even for me." "Where exactly are we going?" Thor inquired. "Home 1, Luke answered. "The Alliance flagship. It's where our leaders coordinate the rebellion against the Empire. They'll be very interested to meet you, especially after what happened on that Star Destroyer." Thor nodded thoughtfully. "In my experience, rebel leaders are often more agreeable than emperors, though not always less complicated." He ran a hand along Mjolnir's handle, feeling the familiar connection to his power. "This hammer has been raised against many tyrants across the realms. It seems fitting that it should find purpose here as, well, at least until I discover a path home." The journey to the rebel rendezvous point gave Thor time to learn more about this strange galaxy and its conflicts. Luke spoke of the Jedi Order's fall, the rise of the Empire, and his own journey from farm boy to the last hope of the Jedi. Han provided a more cynical perspective, painting the galaxy as a place where power had always dominated regardless of who wielded it, Empire or Republic. Through it all, Thor recognized patterns familiar from his own long existence, the rise and fall of orders and empires, the eternal struggle between those who sought control and those who valued freedom. Different realms, different beings, but the same fundamental conflicts played out across the cosmos. As the Millennium Falcon approached the rebel fleet, Thor stood again at the viewport, watching as the scattered warships came into view. They were fewer and smaller than their Imperial counterparts, yet they moved with purpose and coordination that spoke of determination rather than desperation. Here were warriors who fought against overwhelming odds, much as he and his companions had done many times before. Your rebellion reminds me of battles I once fought alongside the Vanir against my father's edicts, Thor remarked to Luke, who had joined him. Odin was not always wise in his rule of the 9 realms, and sometimes it fell to his own son to stand against him when justice demanded it. Luke's expression grew distant. I hope my own confrontation with my father ends differently than it has so far. Thor placed a hand on the young Jedi's shoulder. Family bonds transcend even the greatest conflicts, Luke Skywalker. I have seen enemies become brothers, and brothers become enemies. The heart is the one battlefield where victory and defeat are often indistinguishable. The Millennium Falcon docked with Home 1, the Mon Calamari cruiser serving as the Alliance flagship. Thor followed Luke and Han through the docking bay into the dying ship proper, drawing curious and sometimes apprehensive glances from rebel personnel they passed. His armor, cape, and most particularly Mjolnir marked him as something outside their experience, even in a galaxy of diverse beings and cultures. They were met by a delegation led by Princess Leia Organa, whose regal bearing and commanding presence immediately identified her to Thor as a leader born, not merely appointed. Her resemblance to Luke was subtle but unmistakable to one who had observed siblings across many generations. Luke, Han, she greeted them with relief evident in her voice. When we detected the Falcon's distress beacon near an Imperial Star Destroyer, we feared the worst. Her gaze then fell on Thor, assessing him with the practiced eye of one accustomed to measuring potential allies and threats. And you must be the Thunder God our intelligence reports mentioned. The Empire has prioritized your capture at the highest levels, which makes you either very valuable or very dangerous, possibly both. Thor inclined his head in acknowledgement of her rank. I am Thor Odinson of Asgard, Princess. I find myself a traveler in your realm, displaced from my own. Your companions aided me when the Empire attacked without provocation, and for that, they have my gratitude and my hammer in your cause, at least until I find a way to return home. Leia's expression remained carefully neutral. We appreciate any assistance against the Empire, but I have questions about your encounter with Vader. Our sources indicate you fought him to a standstill, which few in the galaxy can claim. A battle left unfinished, Thor replied with a hint of frustration. Your dark warrior is formidable, wielding powers not unlike sorceries I have encountered in my realm. Had our confrontation continued without interruption, its outcome would have been instructive. Luke intervened before Thor's warrior pride could create misunderstanding. Thor's abilities are unlike anything I've seen, even among Force users. He generates lightning naturally, without drawing on the dark side, and his hammer seems to focus and amplify his power. A gift from my father, Thor explained, holding Mjolnir forward for their inspection. Forged in the heart of a dying star from Uru metal, enchanted to be wielded only by the worthy. In my realm, it is a weapon without equal, though I have found your lightsabers to be surprisingly resistant to its power. Leia's diplomatic training served her well as she navigated this unprecedented situation. Our technical analysts would be fascinated to examine it, with your permission, of course. Thor smiled but shook his head. Mjolnir is not merely a weapon to be studied, Princess. It is an extension of my very being, bound to me by my father's enchantment. None but those deemed worthy may even lift it, let alone understand its nature. To demonstrate, he placed the hammer on the deck before them. You may try, if you wish. Many have attempted. Across the realms, few have succeeded. Han, never one to resist a challenge, stepped forward first. How hard can it be? It's just a fancy hammer. He gripped the handle and pulled, only to find it completely immovable. He strained, his face reddening with effort, but Mjolnir remained as fixed as if it had been embedded in solid stone. Chewbacca tried next, his Wookiee strength famously capable of tearing droids apart with his bare hands. The hammer defied even his mighty effort, not shifting a millimeter despite his frustrated roar. Leia declined to attempt the feat, watching with analytical interest instead. An unusual security system, she observed. Is it keyed to your genetic signature? Thor retrieved Mjolnir effortlessly, the hammer seeming to leap into his hand. Not genetics, princess, but worthiness as defined by the enchantment. It is a test of character as much as strength. In my long life, very few have been able to lift Mjolnir besides myself. Luke regarded the hammer with newfound interest, sensing something through the force that he hadn't noticed before. There was power there, certainly, but also something that resonated with the light side, a kind of inherent judgment or discernment. Is it alive in some way? He asked. It seems to have a presence in the Force. Thor considered the question thoughtfully. Not alive as you might understand it, but not merely an object either. The greatest artifacts of Asgard exist in the space between tool and companion. Mjolnir knows me, has been with me through countless battles and ages. We are connected in ways beyond simple ownership. This explanation, while incomplete, seemed to satisfy the rebel leaders for the moment. More pressing concerns demanded their attention as Admiral Akbar joined their gathering, his Mon Calamari features set in a grave expression. Princess, the Imperial fleet is mobilizing in unprecedented numbers, he reported. Our sources indicate the Emperor himself has taken a personal interest in the pursuit. It seems our new ally has attracted the highest levels of attention. Thor's expression darkened at this news. This Emperor of yours seems determined to add my power to his collection. It is a familiar ambition. Many rulers have sought to control the Thunder. Leia exchanged meaningful glances with her fellow leaders. If the Emperor is personally involved, this changes our strategic situation significantly. We can't maintain our position here if the full Imperial fleet is converging on this sector. Then we move, Luke suggested. The Alliance has survived this long by staying mobile. But now we have something the Emperor wants badly enough to commit his personal attention, Leia said. Her tactical mind already working through the possibilities. That creates both danger and opportunity. Thor understood her meaning immediately. You wish to use me as bait to draw your enemy into a trap of your design. He laughed, a booming sound that filled the chamber. A bold strategy. Loki would approve, though he would be more subtle in suggesting it. We would never ask you to place yourself at risk without your full agreement, Leia clarified quickly. But if the Emperor is fixated on capturing you, we might be able to use that obsession to our advantage. Thor twirled Mjolnir thoughtfully in his hand. In my experience, Princess, tyrants are most vulnerable when they believe victory is within their grasp. Their ambition blinds them to the trap closing around them. His blue eyes gleamed with the light of countless battles. I am no stranger to serving as thunder before the lightning strike. The rebel leaders conferred briefly before Leia turned back to Thor. Then let us develop a plan that maximizes our advantage while minimizing the risk to all involved. The Emperor rarely leaves the Imperial center on Coruscant. If he's willing to personally oversee your capture, we need to understand why. That answer may lie in the Force, Luke suggested. Thor's power, while different from what we know, clearly has implications that concern both Vader and the Emperor. They may see him as either threat or asset to their control of the galaxy. As they moved to the strategic planning center of Home One, Thor found himself impressed by the efficiency and determination of the rebel forces. Despite limited resources and the overwhelming might arrayed against them, they operated with purpose and adaptability that reminded him of warriors he had fought alongside across the realms. The Alliance intelligence officers briefed them on what little they knew of the Emperor's movements. Palpatine had indeed left Coruscant aboard his personal superstar destroyer, the Eclipse, accompanied by several elite Star Destroyer squadrons. Their trajectory suggested they were converging on the sector where Thor had first arrived in this galaxy. He seeks the point of your entry, Luke realized. The Emperor wants to understand how you came to our galaxy. Thor nodded in agreement. A logical pursuit. The boundaries between realms have power of their own, distinct from those who cross them. If your Emperor controls such a crossing point, he could potentially access other universes beyond your own. The implications sent a chill through the rebel leadership. The Empire, already nearly unstoppable within their galaxy, gaining access to other realms was a nightmare scenario. Thor saw their concern and understood it all too well. He had witnessed the damage caused by uncontrolled passage between the 9 realms, the chaos that ensued when boundaries meant to separate worlds were breached. Then our course is clear, Leia decided. We must deny the Emperor access to this crossing point, whatever it may be. Thor's expression grew thoughtful. The site of my arrival may indeed retain traces of the Bifrost energy that brought me here. In my realm, such residual power can sometimes be harnessed to reopen pathways between worlds. Could you use it to return home? Luke asked. Perhaps, Thor allowed. Though without Heimdall's sight to guide the path, the journey would be perilous at best, fatal at worst. The paths between realms are treacherous even for Asgardians. The planning continued into the ship's night cycle, as rebel strategists developed an operation around Thor's abilities and the Emperor's apparent obsession. Intelligence reports continued to flow in, painting an increasingly concerning picture of Imperial mobilization. Whatever Palpatine believed Thor represented, he was committing unprecedented resources to the pursuit. In his assigned quarters aboard Home 1, Thor stood at the viewport, gazing at the stars of this unfamiliar galaxy. They formed patterns unknown to him, constellations unnamed by Asgardian astronomers. He was truly farther from home than he had ever been, beyond even the 9 realms connected by Yggdrasil. A knock at his door interrupted his contemplation. Luke entered at Thor's invitation, carrying what appeared to be star charts and data records. "I've been researching the area where you arrived," the young Jedi explained, spreading the materials on a table. "There's something unusual about that sector of Tatooine. Historical records show periodic energy disturbances dating back centuries, though nothing approaching the magnitude of your arrival." Thor examined the charts with interest. The boundaries between realms are not always fixed. They thin and strengthen in cycles, like tides responding to cosmic forces beyond mortal understanding. Even Asgardians do not fully comprehend the mechanisms that separate one universe from another. Luke activated a holographic display showing energy readings taken shortly after Thor's arrival. "These patterns are unlike anything in our records. The energy signature doesn't match any known phenomenon in our galaxy." "Bifrost energy," Thor confirmed. "The rainbow bridge that connects the 9 realms, its power is drawn from Yggdrasil itself, the world tree that binds our universes together." He pointed to particular formations in the energy pattern. "These are runes of passage, written in power rather than matter. They are the language of realm crossing." Luke studied Thor's face in the blue glow of the hologram. "You really aren't from our universe at all, are you? Not just another planet or galaxy, but somewhere completely beyond." Thor nodded gravely. "The multiverse is vast beyond comprehension, young Skywalker. What you call the galaxy is but one realm among countless others, each with its own laws and powers. The force that binds your reality is but one manifestation of cosmic energy, different in form but perhaps not in essence from the powers that flow through Yggdrasil." This conversation was interrupted by an urgent summons to the command center. They arrived to find Leia and Admiral Akbar reviewing a transmission from an Alliance scout ship. "The Imperial fleet has reached Tatooine," Leia informed them grimly. "They've established a perimeter around the exact location of Thor's arrival and are deploying what appears to be specialized scientific equipment. Our source managed to capture images before being forced to retreat." The holographic display showed Imperial scientists setting up elaborate equipment around a circular pattern scorched into the desert sand. The pattern was unmistakably similar to those left by the Bifrost when it touched down on a world, the Bifrost mark, Thor confirmed. "It retains energy for some time after use, a shadow of the bridge's passage." Admiral Akbar manipulated the display to show a wider view of the Imperial deployment. "They've established a heavily fortified perimeter, multiple star destroyers in orbit, ground forces, TIE squadrons patrolling continuously. And this. He zoomed in on an enormous vessel holding position directly above the Bifrost site. The Emperor's personal superstar destroyer, Eclipse. Thor studied the massive wedge-shaped warship with grudging admiration. Your Emperor does not lack for imposing vessels. Even Asgard's skiffs would appear humble beside such a craft. The Eclipse is more than just large, Leia explained. It's equipped with experimental weapons technology and houses the Emperor's personal guard. Attacking it directly would be suicide. Then we must be cunning rather than direct, Thor suggested. In my thousands of years of battle, I have learned that the mightiest opponent can be undone by precision rather than brute force. Luke had been studying the deployment pattern with a tactician's eye. They've focused their attention upward, expecting an approach from space. But there may be weaknesses in their ground perimeter. The planning session that followed was intense, drawing on the combined experience of the rebel strategists and Thor's millennia of warfare across the realms. A bold plan began to take shape, one that would use the Emperor's obsession against him, while playing to the Alliance's strengths. As the operation was finalized, Thor stepped away briefly to prepare himself for the coming battle. He found a quiet corner of the ship where he could commune with Mjolnir, feeling the hammer's energy resonate with his own. In this strange realm, so far from the World Tree's nurturing power, he needed to conserve and focus his strength for what lay ahead. Luke found him there, deep in what appeared to be meditation. The Jedi waited respectfully until Thor acknowledged his presence. I have known many warriors across many worlds, Luke Skywalker, Thor said without opening his eyes. Few have carried the weight of destiny that you bear. The conflict with your father troubles you deeply. Luke seemed surprised by Thor's perception. I thought Jedi were supposed to be the intuitive ones. Thor opened his eyes, a faint smile touching his lips. One does not live for thousands of years without learning to read the hearts of fellow warriors. Your struggle is written in your stance, your voice, the way you hold your weapon. Luke settled beside Thor, both of them now looking out at the stars. I believe there is still good in him, beneath the mask and the darkness. The others think I'm naive, that Vader destroyed Anakin Skywalker completely. The heart is never truly destroyed, only buried, Thor replied thoughtfully. I have seen beings fall into darkness deeper than any you can imagine, only to find their way back when something precious was at stake. He placed a hand on Luke's shoulder. The bond between father and son transcends even the greatest darkness. Trust in that bond, young Skywalker. Their moment of connection was interrupted by the ship-wide announcement that they were approaching the Tatooine system. The time for contemplation had passed. Now was the time for action. The rebel fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the system, far enough from the Imperial blockade to avoid immediate detection but close, enough to deploy their forces. The plan called for a small strike team to approach the Bifrost site from the surface, while the main fleet created a diversion in orbit. Thor would accompany Luke, Han, and Chewbacca on the ground mission, using the Millennium Falcon's exceptional sensor evasion capabilities to slip past Imperial patrols. Their goal was twofold: disrupt whatever the Emperor was attempting with the Bifrost energy, and if possible, use that same energy to send Thor back to his realm. As they boarded the Falcon, Thor took a moment to address his companions. Whatever comes, know that it has been my honor to fight alongside warriors of your caliber. Songs will be sung of this day in Asgard's halls when I return to tell the tale. Han rolled his eyes at the formal speech, but there was genuine respect in his voice when he replied, Yeah, well, just try not to bring down too much lightning inside my ship. The circuitry's delicate. The Falcon detached from Home 1 and began its approach to Tatooine, taking a roundabout course to avoid Imperial detection. Meanwhile, the rebel fleet prepared to launch its diversion, a seemingly all-out assault on the Imperial blockade that would draw attention away from the small infiltration team. As they entered Tatooine's atmosphere, keeping low to avoid detection, Thor stood in the Falcon's cockpit, watching the desert landscape blur beneath them. Somewhere ahead lay the point where he had first entered this realm, the scorched mark of the Bifrost's touch upon alien sand. And waiting there, a dark emperor who sought to claim the power of the gods for his own. Thor's grip tightened on Mjolnir's handle. Many had made such attempts across the long millennia of his existence. None had succeeded. The hammer hummed in his grasp, responding to his resolve, a promise of thunder yet to come. The Millennium Falcon approached the Imperial perimeter from below radar coverage, using a narrow canyon for concealment. Han's piloting skills proved exceptional as he navigated the treacherous terrain, keeping the ship mere meters above the rock formations while maintaining enough speed to reach their target. "Imperial checkpoint ahead," he announced tensely. "Looks like they've got sensor arrays covering the canyon exit. We'll need to go over or through." Thor moved to the boarding ramp controls. "Continue your approach, Han Solo. I will create our passage." Despite Luke's protests about the risk of detection, Thor insisted this was their best option. The ramp lowered partially, allowing Thor to survey the approaching Imperial position while remaining inside the ship's shield envelope. The checkpoint was a small outpost with scanner arrays and a contingent of stormtroopers, positioned precisely where the canyon opened onto the wider desert plain. "Hold your course steady," Thor instructed. He raised Mjolnir, focusing his power with precision rather than raw force. The hammer began to glow with contained energy, drawing ambient electricity from the Falcon's systems and the atmosphere itself. With a controlled motion, Thor released a narrow bolt of lightning that struck the Imperial sensor array directly. The equipment exploded spectacularly, sending stormtroopers scrambling for cover. Before they could organize a response or report the attack, Thor sent a second bolt into their communications equipment. "Now, Han Solo," he called, "before they can alert their command." The Falcon burst from the canyon at maximum speed, streaking over the disabled checkpoint before the disorganized stormtroopers could bring their weapons to bear. By the time they recovered enough to fire, the ship was already a distant speck against the desert sky. "Impressive targeting," Luke commented as Thor sealed the boarding ramp. "Most Force users couldn't manage that kind of precision at that range." Thor returned Mjolnir to his belt with satisfaction. When you have practiced with the same weapon for over 1,000 years, young Skywalker, such feats become second nature. Their moment of success was short-lived. The Falcon's sensors detected TIE fighters launching from the nearest Star Destroyer, clearly responding to the checkpoint's destruction, even if they hadn't received direct communication. "So much for the subtle approach," Han muttered, pushing the ship's engines to maximum as they raced toward their target. "We've got about 3 minutes before those TIEs are on top of us." In orbit above them, the Rebel fleet chose that moment to launch its diversionary attack. The sky lit up with the energy exchanges of capital ships engaged in battle, drawing the attention of much of the Imperial fleet. Several Star Destroyers began to break orbit, moving to engage the Rebel forces and leaving fewer ships to guard the Bifrost site. The distraction worked partially, diverting some of the TIE squadrons away from pursuit of the Falcon, but enough remained to pose a serious threat as Han pushed the freighter toward their objective. "There it is." Luke pointed to a heavily fortified installation surrounded by Imperial walkers, ground troops, and defensive emplacements. At its center was the distinctive circular pattern of the Bifrost impact, now surrounded by scientific equipment and glowing with unnatural energy. Thor felt a surge of recognition at the sight. The Imperials had somehow activated the residual Bifrost energy, amplifying it through their technology. The circular pattern now pulsed with rainbow light reminiscent of the bridge between realms, though distorted and unstable. "They attempt to force open the pathway between worlds," he said grimly. "Such efforts rarely end well for those who lack understanding of the cosmic forces they manipulate." Above the site hovered the Eclipse, the Emperor's massive flagship casting an ominous shadow over the desert below. Its presence confirmed that Palpatine himself was overseeing the operation, his dark will focused on breaching the barriers between universes. The approaching TIE fighters forced Han to take evasive action, preventing them from getting closer to the site. "We need to lose these guys before we can even think about landing," he shouted as the ship shuddered under near misses. Thor exchanged glances with Luke. Perhaps it is time to demonstrate why pursuing the God of Thunder is unwise. Without waiting for approval, he moved back to the boarding ramp. Luke followed, understanding Thor's intention and preparing to use the Force to protect them both from the vacuum of space when the ramp opened. "Han, drop the rear shields for 3 seconds on my mark," Luke called into his comlink. "Are you crazy? We're under fire," Han's voice crackled back. "Trust me, 3 seconds only." Luke insisted, positioning himself beside Thor at the ramp. Han's curse was audible even without the comlink, but he acknowledged the request. "Ready on your mark, but if we all die, I'm blaming you two." Luke nodded to Thor, who raised Mjolnir and began summoning his power. This time, there was no need for precision or restraint. The hammer crackled with building energy, drawing power from Thor's godly essence rather than external sources. "Now," Luke shouted into the comlink. The boarding ramp lowered as the Falcon's rear shields dropped momentarily. Luke anchored himself and Thor with the Force, preventing them from being pulled into the vacuum of space. Thor, his cape and hair whipping wildly in the explosive decompression, thrust Mjolnir forward and unleashed his full power. The lightning that erupted from the hammer was no mere bolt but a sustained torrent of pure energy, a river of destruction that swept through the pursuing TIE fighters. Where it touched, Imperial craft exploded or spun out of control, their systems overloaded by power beyond their designers' imagination. In seconds, the immediate pursuit was transformed from organized formation to chaos and debris. Luke signaled Han, who raised the shields and closed the ramp immediately. The interior of the Falcon repressurized, leaving Thor and Luke breathless but triumphant. "That," Han's voice came over the intercom, "was either the craziest or most brilliant thing I've ever seen. Maybe both." Thor leaned against the bulkhead, the effort having taken more of his strength than he would admit. In this realm, far from the world tree, even his godly powers had limits. "The way is clear for now, but we must move quickly. The Emperor will not be deterred by the loss of a few fighters." Indeed, sensors showed more Imperial forces converging on their position, even as the rebel fleet engaged the bulk of the blockade in orbit. The diversionary attack was drawing away some resources, but the Emperor had clearly prioritized the Bifrost site above all else. Han brought the Falcon in fast and low, aiming for a landing position just outside the Imperial perimeter. "This is as close as I can get without being shot down," he announced. "You'll have to go the rest of the way on foot." Thor surveyed the terrain through the viewport. Nearly a kilometer of open desert separated them from the Imperial installation, with minimal cover and undoubtedly sensors sweeping the area. Luke pointed to a series of low ridges running parallel to the perimeter. "If we follow those, we might get close enough to make a final sprint to the barrier." "And then?" Han asked skeptically. "There must be 1,000 stormtroopers guarding that site, not to mention whatever dark force users the Emperor brought along." Thor lifted Mjolnir with renewed determination. "Then we bring the storm." The plan was desperate but not without hope. Thor and Luke would approach the perimeter using the natural terrain for cover, while Han and Chewbacca kept the Falcon ready for a rapid extraction. Once in position, Thor would create a diversion with his most spectacular lightning display yet, drawing Imperial tension while Luke infiltrated the site to sabotage the equipment. They disembarked quickly, Thor and Luke moving toward the ridgeline while the Falcon retreated to a safer distance. The twin suns beat down mercilessly as they made their way across the desert, using the rocky terrain to avoid Imperial sensors as much as possible. As they drew closer to the perimeter, the energy emanating from the Bifrost site became palpable even to Luke. "I can feel it through the Force," he murmured. "It's like nothing I've encountered before. Not light, not dark, but different, older somehow." Thor nodded in understanding. "The paths between realms predate even Asgard itself. They are cosmic constants, like the Force in your universe or Yggdrasil in mine. What your Emperor attempts is to bend such constants to his will, a dangerous ambition that has destroyed civilizations before. They reach the final ridge before the Imperial perimeter, taking cover behind weather-worn rocks to survey the defenses. The installation was even more heavily guarded than it had appeared from the air, with concentric rings of stormtroopers, walkers, and energy barriers surrounding the central area where scientists worked on the glowing Bifrost mark. Above it all hovered the eclipse, its massive shadow turning day to artificial night beneath its bulk. Smaller craft moved between the superstar destroyer and the ground installation, ferrying equipment and personnel in a continuous stream. "Look there." Luke pointed to a hooded figure moving through the central area, Imperial guards and scientists bowing deeply as the figure passed. The Emperor himself. Even from this distance, Thor could sense the darkness emanating from the hooded form. It reminded him of Hela's malevolent presence, a corruption of natural order into something twisted and wrong. This was power perverted from its intended purpose, bent toward domination rather than balance. "A dark sorcerer indeed," Thor murmured. "His presence explains the fear in his servants." Luke's expression was grim. The Emperor's power in the dark side is unmatched. Even Vader bows to his mastery. "All sorcerers have their limitations," Thor replied. "Let us discover his." They waited for the rebel fleet to engage the Imperial blockade fully before making their move. When the sky above erupted in renewed battle, Thor rose from their hiding place, Mjolnir raised high. "Remember," he said to Luke, "when the storm is at its height, move toward the equipment. Disable it however you can. I will keep their attention fixed firmly on me." Luke nodded, lightsaber in hand but not yet activated. "May the Force be with you, Thor." The god of thunder smiled fiercely. "And may Asgard's strength be with you, Luke Skywalker." With that, Thor summoned his power. The cloudless sky above the desert began to darken as storm clouds formed from nothing, swirling in an unnatural pattern directly above the Imperial installation. The scientists looked up in alarm as their equipment registered the sudden atmospheric disturbance. Thor stepped into view atop the ridge, his red cape billowing dramatically in the rising wind, Mjolnir crackling with barely contained energy. He cut an imposing figure against the darkening sky, a warrior god challenging an empire. "Emperor," his voice boomed across the desert, amplified by thunder. "You seek the power of Asgard, yet understand nothing of its nature or purpose. I am Thor Odinson, and I have come to end your meddling with forces beyond your comprehension." The challenge had the desired effect. Stormtroopers turned their attention toward the ridge, weapons raised. ATST walkers pivoted to bring their cannons to bear. And in the central area, the hooded figure of Emperor Palpatine himself looked up, his face hidden in shadow but his attention unmistakably captured. Thor gave them no time to organize a response. With a mighty swing of Mjolnir, he called down lightning from the gathering storm. It struck the outer perimeter with devastating force, scattering stormtroopers and shorting out energy barriers. A second strike disabled an ATST, sending it crashing to the desert floor in a heap of sparking metal. Using the confusion as cover, Luke began making his way along the ridge, moving parallel to the perimeter until he found a suitable infiltration point. The Imperial forces were now fully focused on Thor, who continued his spectacular assault from his exposed position. The Thunder God advanced confidently into the teeth of Imperial defenses, deflecting blaster bolts with whirling Mjolnir and answering their fire with devastating lightning strikes. Where resistance was heaviest, he took to the air, using the hammer's power to carry him above the battlefield before crashing down among Imperial troops with earth-shaking force. It was a display of power meant to awe as much as destroy, drawing all eyes and senses toward Thor while Luke slipped through the chaos toward the central installation. The young Jedi used the Force to cloud the perceptions of those he passed, moving like a shadow through the Imperial lines. Emperor Palpatine watched the battle unfold with calculating interest. The being from another realm was indeed as powerful as Vader had reported, perhaps more so. Such power, properly harnessed and bent to the dark side, could extend Imperial reach beyond their own galaxy. And if this Asgard was as advanced as its champion suggested, conquering it would provide technologies beyond even the Death Star's capabilities. "Magnificent," Palpatine murmured as Thor decimated another squad of his elite troops, but ultimately futile. The Emperor raised his gnarled hands, and dark force lightning erupted from his fingertips. Unlike Thor's natural lightning, this energy was corrupted, tinged with malevolent purpose and the dark side's hunger. It streaked across the battlefield toward Thor, who was momentarily distracted by Imperial walkers, converging on his position. The dark energy struck Thor squarely, driving him to one knee. The sensation was unlike any lightning he had ever encountered, carrying not just destructive force but malevolent will, seeking to corrupt as it destroyed. It reminded him disturbingly of Hela's necrotic power, that same wrongness that defied natural law. Gritting his teeth against the pain, Thor raised Mjolnir defensively. The hammer absorbed much of the dark energy, though some continued to course painfully through his body. With a mighty effort, he stood against the onslaught, his own lightning beginning to crackle around him in response. "Your sorcery is impressive, Emperor," Thor called out, his voice strained but defiant. "But I have faced darker gods than you across 10,000 years. With those words, Thor redirected his hammer, sending a blinding bolt of pure lightning to answer Palpatine's attack. The two energies met in a spectacular collision, dark force lightning against natural power of Asgard. The resulting explosion knocked back Imperial troops and equipment for dozens of meters in all directions, creating a momentary lull in the battle. Luke used this distraction to reach the central area where the Bifrost mark pulsed with increasing intensity. The Imperial scientists had connected it to machinery that appeared to be amplifying and stabilizing the residual energy, forcing the potential gateway between realms to remain open against its natural tendency to close. The equipment hummed with power, drawing energy from massive generators to maintain the unnatural state. Drawing on his mechanical knowledge from years of repairing moisture vaporators, Luke quickly assessed the system's vulnerabilities. The power regulation was the obvious weak point. If overloaded, the entire apparatus would fail catastrophically. Meanwhile, Thor and Palpatine circled each other warily, each taking measure of the other's abilities. The initial exchange had demonstrated that they were more evenly matched than either had anticipated, at least in this environment where both operated at a distance from their power sources. "You are far from home, Asgardian." Palpatine's voice was deceptively gentle, almost conversational. "I can feel it in your power, the strain of maintaining your abilities in this realm. How long can you continue before your strength fails? Hours? Minutes?" Thor laughed, though there was truth in the Emperor's assessment. "Long enough to stop your scheme, sorcerer. The boundaries between realms are not toys for your amusement or conquest." "Boundaries exist to be crossed," Palpatine replied. "Power exists to be taken. Surely a god understands this fundamental truth." "That is where you err," Thor countered, gathering his strength for another exchange. "Power exists to protect, to preserve balance. A lesson my father taught me across centuries of stubborn learning." Palpatine's face twisted in contempt. "Then your father was as weak as you." The insult had its intended effect. Thor lunged forward with a roar of anger, Mjolnir swinging in a devastating arc toward the Emperor. But Palpatine had anticipated this reaction, sidestepping with preternatural speed and unleashing another barrage of dark lightning at point-blank range. This time, Thor had no opportunity to defend. The corrupted energy enveloped him, driving him to the ground in genuine agony. Mjolnir fell from his grasp, rolling just beyond reach as the Emperor pressed his advantage, pouring more dark power into the assault. "I feel your strength ebbing, God of Thunder," Palpatine gloated. "Soon you will kneel willingly, and your power will serve the Empire." Through the haze of pain, Thor saw Luke completing his sabotage of the Imperial equipment. The young Jedi had rerouted power conduits to create a feedback loop that would soon overload the entire system. But he needed more time, just a few moments longer to complete the work and escape the inevitable explosion. With supreme effort, Thor fixed his gaze on Mjolnir, calling to the weapon with the bond forged across millennia of companionship. The hammer trembled, responding to its master's need despite the dark side energy attempting to sever their connection. I kneel. To no one. Thor ground out through clenched teeth. Especially not false emperors who hide behind stolen power. Mjolnir suddenly leapt from the ground, flying not to Thor's hand but directly at Palpatine himself. The Emperor was forced to break off his attack to avoid the hammer, which curved in mid-air to return to Thor's outstretched hand. The moment's respite was enough for the Thunder God to regain his feet, lightning once again crackling around his form. "You speak of stolen power." Palpatine snarled, genuine anger breaking through his calculated facade. "I earned my mastery of the dark side through decades of study and sacrifice. What did you do to earn your godhood but be born to privilege?" The accusation struck closer to home than the Emperor could know, echoing doubts Thor had wrestled with in his younger, more arrogant days. But he was no longer that untested prince, demanding glory as his birthright. "You speak of what you do not understand," Thor replied, gathering the storm clouds closer overhead. "My power comes with duty, with responsibility to maintain cosmic balance. Yours seeks only to dominate, to bend all things to your will. That is not strength, but weakness disguised as power." Their philosophical debate was cut short by a sudden tremor running through the installation. Luke had completed his sabotage, and the equipment was beginning to overload. The Bifrost mark pulsed with increasingly erratic energy, rainbow light spiraling upward in unstable patterns. Palpatine sensed the danger immediately, turning his attention from Thor to the failing equipment. "No," he snarled, directing his Imperial guards to stop the cascade failure. But it was too late. The system had passed the critical point, power surging uncontrollably through circuits never designed to handle such energy. The first explosion took out the main control panel in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Secondary systems failed in rapid succession, each detonation adding to the chain reaction. Imperial scientists and technicians fled in panic as their carefully constructed apparatus began tearing itself apart. Luke had already retreated to the perimeter, using the chaos to slip past Imperial defenses. He signaled to Han on his comlink, requesting immediate extraction as the situation deteriorated. Thor, seeing that Luke had succeeded and was clear of immediate danger, decided it was time to end his confrontation with the Emperor. Drawing deeply on his remaining strength, he summoned the full fury of the storm he had been building overhead. Lightning struck all around the installation, targeting Imperial forces with devastating accuracy while avoiding the increasingly unstable Bifrost mark. Palpatine, realizing his plan was collapsing, abandoned the pretense of civilized discourse. With a howl of rage, he unleashed the full extent of his dark side powers, not just lightning, but a wave of malevolent force energy that rippled outward like a physical blow. Thor met the attack with Mjolnir raised high, the hammer absorbing and dispersing much of the dark energy. But the effort cost him dearly, draining reserves already depleted by extended battle in a realm distant from his power source. He dropped to one knee again, breathing heavily, as the Emperor pressed forward, sensing weakness. "Your interference ends now, Asgardian," Palpatine declared, preparing a final devastating attack. "What remains of your power will serve the Empire, whether you survive to witness it or not." Before the Emperor could deliver his coup de grâce, the overloading equipment reached critical mass. The Bifrost mark, destabilized by the sabotaged machinery and the competing energies of Thor and Palpatine's battle, erupted in a blinding column of rainbow light that shot skyward with explosive force. The shockwave knocked both combatants backward, along with any Imperial forces still in the vicinity. Thor, despite his exhaustion, recovered more quickly than the Emperor. He seized the opportunity to retreat, using Mjolnir to carry him skyward toward where the Millennium Falcon was descending to extract Luke. Behind him, the Bifrost site continued to destabilize, reality itself seeming to warp and distort around the point where the boundaries between realms had been weakened. The Falcon hovered precariously at the edge of the disturbance, boarding ramp extended. Luke was already aboard, having been picked up moments earlier. Thor landed heavily on the ramp, nearly collapsing as he made his way inside the ship. "Go!" he shouted to Han as the ramp sealed behind him. "The boundary is collapsing completely." The Falcon accelerated away from the installation as the distortion expanded rapidly. Imperial forces scrambled to evacuate, abandoning equipment and positions in their haste to escape the growing anomaly. Above, the Eclipse began moving ponderously away, its massive engines struggling against the gravitational distortion now emanating from the Bifrost site. From the Falcon's viewport, they watched as the disturbance reached critical proportions. Space and time seemed to fold inward at the center of the Bifrost mark, creating a vortex that began pulling in everything within its expanding radius. Imperial equipment, vehicles, and unfortunate troops too slow to escape were drawn inexorably toward the collapsing boundary between realms. "What's happening?" Han demanded as he pushed the Falcon's engines to maximum, fighting to stay ahead of the effect. "I thought we were just going to wreck their equipment." "The Emperor's meddling weakened the natural barrier between realms," Thor explained, leaning heavily against the bulkhead. "What you see is the consequence of forcing open doors meant to remain closed except under specific conditions." The vortex continued to grow, its pull becoming strong enough to affect the Falcon despite their distance and speed. The ship shuddered as conflicting gravitational forces strained its structural integrity. "We need to get to orbit immediately," Luke urged. "The Rebel fleet is beginning withdrawal. They can't hold off the Imperial blockade much longer." Han didn't need to be told twice. He angled the Falcon upward, engines screaming in protest as they fought both Tatooine's gravity and the pull of the dimensional collapse behind them. Chewbacca worked frantically at the engineering station, rerouting power to maintain critical systems under the strain. As they climbed through the atmosphere, they caught glimpses of the wider battle. Imperial Star Destroyers were breaking orbit, some moving to engage the retreating Rebel fleet, while others simply fled the expanding anomaly. The Eclipse itself was using its massive engines to push away from Tatooine, apparently with the Emperor safely aboard. Thor watched the chaos with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. The collapse of the boundary would eventually stabilize naturally, sealing the weakened point between realms, but not before causing considerable destruction in the immediate vicinity. It was an outcome he had not intended but could not have prevented once Palpatine's interference reached a critical point. The Falcon broke free of Tatooine's atmosphere into the relative safety of space, though the dimensional disturbance was visible even from orbit as a swirling vortex of energy centered on the Bifrost site. Imperial and Rebel ships alike were giving it a wide berth, their immediate conflict temporarily forgotten in the face of the cosmic phenomenon. "We need to rendezvous with the fleet before they jump to hyperspace," Luke reminded Han, who was already plotting a course toward the distant formation of Rebel ships. Thor remained at the viewport, watching the disturbance with growing thoughtfulness. The collapsing boundary represented both danger and opportunity. The chaotic energy made passage unpredictable, potentially fatal, yet it was also a rare opening back to the pathways between realms. "I may not get another chance," he said quietly, more to himself than his companions. Luke turned to him in sudden understanding. "You're thinking of trying to use the collapse to return home?" Thor nodded gravely. "The pathways are unstable, dangerous, but they are pathways nonetheless. With Mjolnir to guide me and my knowledge of the World Tree's branches, I might find my way back to Asgard." "That's insane," Han protested. "You said yourself that boundary is collapsing. Anything that gets pulled in could be torn apart." "I am not mortal, Han Solo," Thor reminded him with a faint smile. "And I have traveled the paths between realms many times, though never under such chaotic conditions. The risk is great, but so is the need. My realm may have need of me, as does my brother despite our quarrels. Luke studied Thor's resolved expression and recognized the decision had already been made. The Alliance would benefit greatly from your continued aid against the Empire, he said, but I understand the call of home and family. Thor clasped the young Jedi's shoulder firmly. Your rebellion has strength beyond mere power, Luke Skywalker. You fight not just with weapons but with hope, with conviction in something greater than yourselves. Such spirit is more valuable than 1,000 thunderbolts. He turned to Han next. Your ship and your courage rival the finest warriors of Asgard. Songs would be sung of Han Solo in the Golden Halls had fate allowed me to bring you there as honored guest. Chewbacca received a respectful nod that acknowledged one warrior's recognition of another. And to you, mighty Chewbacca, whose strength and loyalty are beyond question, your people would find kinship with the warriors of Vanaheim. With these farewells spoken, Thor moved toward the Falcon's boarding ramp. I must go now, while the pathway remains open enough to attempt passage. Delay would only make the journey more perilous. Han reluctantly adjusted their course, bringing them within safe distance of the collapsing boundary. The Falcon's sensors indicated the phenomenon was beginning to stabilize, the most violent phase of the collapse giving way to a more contained distortion. Soon, the opportunity would be lost entirely. At the boarding ramp, Thor paused for a final farewell. Remember, my friends, that the cosmos is vaster than any empire or rebellion. Realms beyond counting exist alongside your own, each with their own struggles and triumphs. Perhaps someday our paths will cross again, when the world tree's branches align in more favorable conjunction. Luke offered his hand, which Thor clasped in the warrior's grip. May the Force be with you, Thor Odinson. And may Asgard's strength go with you, Luke Skywalker. Remember what I said about your father. The heart is never truly destroyed, only buried beneath pain and fear. Reach for that heart when the time comes. With these parting words, Thor activated the boarding ramp. The vacuum of space pulled at his cape and hair, but he stood unaffected, his Asgardian physiology protecting him from effects that would kill mortals instantly. Mjolnir was raised before him, already beginning to glow with power as he prepared for the leap into the unknown. For Asgard! Thor's voice somehow carried even through the vacuum as he launched himself from the Falcon's ramp, using Mjolnir to propel himself toward the swirling vortex of collapsing dimensional boundaries. From the Falcon's viewport, Luke, Han, and Chewbacca watched as Thor's form streaked toward the distortion, lightning crackling around him in a protective cocoon of Asgardian power. He entered the vortex not as flotsam to be torn apart, but as a purposeful traveler, using Mjolnir to guide his path through the chaos of colliding realities. For a brief moment, Thor was silhouetted against the rainbow energies of the collapsed Bifrost, hammer raised in triumph or farewell, impossible to determine which. Then the vortex pulsed once more, and he was gone, vanished into the pathways between realms. The dimensional collapse accelerated after Thor's passage, as if his transit had been the final catalyst needed to complete the natural healing of the boundary. Within minutes, the vortex had shrunk to a mere point of light, then winked out entirely, leaving only empty space where the disturbance had been. In the Empire's aftermath, rumors spread across the galaxy of the being who had challenged the Emperor himself, calling down the storm to defy Imperial might. On Tatooine, moisture farmers spoke in hushed tones of the god who had walked among them briefly, his hammer creating thunder in cloudless skies. Within the Rebel Alliance, the tale of Thor became a legend of hope, proof that even the mightiest tyrant could be vulnerable. Darth Vader, observing the collapsed boundary from the bridge of the eclipse, turned to his master with unreadable expression behind his mask. He escaped, my master. Emperor Palpatine's ravaged face showed little emotion, though the fingers of one hand tapped rhythmically on the armrest of his command chair. For now. But we have gathered invaluable data on both this Asgardian and the dimensional boundaries themselves. Our scientists will analyze the energy signatures, learn their properties. His thin lips curved in a cold smile. The Thunder God has shown us the door to other realms, Lord Vader. In time, we shall craft the key. As the Imperial fleet regrouped and the eclipse set course for Coruscant, Palpatine retired to his private meditation chamber. There, surrounded by Sith artifacts gathered across decades, he reflected on the confrontation with Thor. The Asgardians' power had been formidable, different from the Force, yet somehow connected to the same cosmic fabric. Such power, properly understood and harnessed, could extend Imperial reach beyond their galaxy into realms only glimpsed in ancient Sith texts. Meanwhile, aboard Home One, Luke Skywalker stood alone at a viewport, watching the stars of an alien galaxy. Something Thor had said resonated deeply within him, about hearts buried but not destroyed. As he contemplated his next confrontation with Vader, he found new resolve in the Thunder God's wisdom. If beings from different universes could find common cause against tyranny, perhaps even the divide between father and son, Jedi and Sith, could one day be bridged. Across the dimensional gulf, beyond the sight of any being in the galaxy far, far away, Thor Odinson emerged from the pathways between realms. Battered by the chaotic journey but ultimately triumphant, he found himself not on Asgard but on Midgard, in a snow-covered forest far from human settlement. Mjolnir, his faithful companion, had guided him home to the Nine Realms, though not precisely to his intended destination. Rising to his feet in the pristine snow, Thor looked to the stars above, recognizing constellations familiar to Asgardian eyes. He had returned to his proper universe, though the journey back to Asgard itself still lay ahead. As he raised Mjolnir to summon the Bifrost properly, Thor reflected on the galaxy he had left behind, the friends made and battles fought across the stars. "May your rebellion find victory, Luke Skywalker," he murmured to the cosmos, "and may you remember that even gods can learn from mortals who fight with hope in their hearts." The Bifrost descended in its familiar column of rainbow light, carrying Thor upward toward Asgard, and whatever new adventures awaited the God of Thunder. But part of him would always remember the galaxy far, far away, where the Force flowed through all things, and a small band of rebels dared to challenge, an empire that spanned the stars. In that remembrance, their struggles would never truly end, but live on in the eternal cosmic tapestry that connected all realms, all worlds, all beings who fought for what they believed was right.